No one alive in the winter of 1861 could have imagined the changes they would soon experience. Within months of the new year, thousands of Southern Illinois men would go off to war. 12 months later, hundreds of them would be dead and buried in places no one had known before, with names like Belmont, Fort Donelson, and Shiloh. The coming Civil War would alter what many believed to be absolute and unshakable truths about slavery and states' rights. Southern Illinois Democrat Congressman John A. Logan, the father of the state's black codes, a man who supported the Fugitive Slave Act and swore he would bring his men home if Lincoln freed the slaves. Even Logan became a steadfast supporter of the abolition of slavery and the vote for America's former slaves.
And it didn't change everybody like it did Logan. It seems to have affected him more deeply, but there were a lot of people out there who went through that same change that Logan did.
The weeks leading up to the Civil War was the calm before the storm, but not just any storm. The war would alter every aspect of the nation's future, and in so doing, change the lives of those caught in the sweep of history.
Egypt, let it be said for the benefit of the uninitiated, is the southernmost part of Illinois. Theoretically, its northern boundary is an east-west line between St. Louis and Vincennes, Indiana. Egyptians know and cherish the history of southern Illinois, but elsewhere it has been forgotten. Paul Engel, historian.
How these southernmost counties came to be called Egypt remains a mystery. Many believe it originated when farmers from central and northern Illinois traveled south to buy corn after an early frost destroyed their crops. The story is likened to Joseph's 10 brethren in Genesis, who went down to Egypt to buy corn. But Egypt held a negative meaning for most northern Illinoisans. Ulysses Grant, in May 1861, described the people of Egypt as ignorant, disloyal, intemperate, and generally heathenish. In time, Grant would change his mind. The election of 1860 left no doubt where Egypt stood politically. Abraham Lincoln received fewer than 20% of the votes in Egypt. Southern Illinois was Democrat to the core. The war started with the bombardment of Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, and President Lincoln's call for volunteers to save the Union. The decision triggered a quick response in Egypt as small groups, first in Marion, then in Carbondale, proclaimed their right and duty to withdraw from the Union.
They believed that what Lincoln was doing was unjust, it was diabolical, it was an unholy war, and they were going to have no part of it. Lincoln should leave the nation's southern brethren alone.
At this time, Carbondale founder and businessman Daniel Brush seemed almost a lone voice as he carried an American flag across the town square and delivered a pro-Union speech from a rooftop. A trainload of militia left Chicago for Cairo, but stopped at the Illinois Central Railroad Bridge over the Big Muddy River in Jackson County to post a company to guard the bridge. There were rumors that secessionists planned to blow it up.
Nothing ever came from this, but it was not too long after that they sent a second company there. So there were 200 men stationed at that bridge.
On April 22nd, 10 days after Fort Sumter, 595 men of the Illinois militia patrolled the streets of Cairo, all from Chicago. In May 1861, a small group traveled south from Williamson and Jackson counties to join the Confederate Army. That same month, Michael Lawler raised Egypt's 1st Regiment, the 18th Illinois Infantry. Carbondale founder Daniel Brush raised Company K of the 18th and served as its captain. William and Thomas Richards joined Brush's Company K. Uncharacteristically quiet was Southern Illinois Congressman John A. Logan. They called him Egypt's spokesman, and he was wildly popular, collecting huge vote majorities at every election. He reflected the beliefs of his constituents and of his own family. His father once owned slaves in Missouri, and his mother was a native of North Carolina. This led many to interpret Logan's silence as sympathetic towards the South. It did not help the congressman's reputation when his 2 brother-in-laws expressed their Southern sympathies through words and actions. Logan's sister Annie's husband, Israel Blanchard, was arrested for speaking out in support of the South. His wife Mary's younger brother, Hybert Cunningham, joined the Confederate Army, a decision that broke her heart.
May 25th, 1861. My dear John, war has separated us forever. I have no hope of again beholding him this side of eternity, and I give him up as dead and gone forever. Oh, life, how full of sorrow.
Mary's pain was not uncommon among the families of Egypt. In the late spring and early summer of 1861, military camps sprouted in small crossroads like Anna and Villa Ridge. These camps quickly became breeding grounds for disease and death.
Camp Anna, June 3rd, 1861. My dear sister, there's one more man died. He was taken sick a Thursday morning and died a Friday. This is Sunday morning. Just to think of old time and look at that big cloud. It looks right lonesome, sure.
Cairo became the second most important place in the nation next to Washington, D.C. Thousands of troops occupied the region in and around Cairo, including an earthen structure at the tip of Illinois called Fort Defiance. By June 1861, over 1,000 Egyptians served in the Union Army. Egypt's spokesman broke his silence in June during a visit to Springfield, Illinois. In a speech to a group of Illinois militia approaching the end of their enlistment, Logan stepped forward and joked with the troops, and then appealed for them to stay put and finish the job. The message impressed the Army commander-in-charge, Ulysses Grant, who was at first suspicious of Logan. In his memoirs, Grant said the speech inspired his men to such a point they would have stayed in the Army as long as an enemy remained to be fought. Within a few weeks, Logan's words turned to action.
My dear Mary,
after returning to Washington to attend a special session of Congress, Logan writes his wife Mary that he intends to visit Union troops in Virginia the following day and promises to
stay at a respectful distance to be out of danger.
Out of danger and at a respectful distance meant one thing to Mary and something completely different to Logan. On July 20th, 1861, Logan again scratched out another letter to Mary.
I have just returned from Bull's Run and was in the fight with a musket.
The congressman, in his top hat and frock coat, borrowed a rifle from a fleeing Union soldier and fired on the Confederates. This was the first major battle of the Civil War.
I came out without a scratch. I also came back black from powder, bloody from carrying wounded soldiers. I am now glad that I went. No man who saw me on the field will say that I wanted for courage.
Soon after, Logan returned to Southern Illinois and went to work with friends to organize a new regiment. At a planned event in Marion on August 19, 1861, Egypt's spokesman climbed onto a wagon and told the crowd the time had come for a man to be for or against his country.
How long can one state stand up against another, or 2 or 3 states against others? The Union once dissolved, we shall have innumerable confederacies and rebellions. I, for one, shall stand or fall for this Union, and shall this day enroll for the war. I want as many of you as will to come with me. If you say no, and see your best interest and the welfare of your homes and children in another direction, may God protect you.
Egypt's anti-war sentiments quickly turned to support for the Union. In his memoirs, Grant gave Logan full credit for the change. Among the additional men joining at this time were 2 more of the Richards boys. Alexander and Benjamin joined Company H of the 27th Illinois. Logan's decision caused an estrangement with not only political friends and allies, but also with his family. Logan's mother Elizabeth told her son she never wanted to see him again.
There was a group of men who were drilling in Murfreesboro on the courthouse lawn in preparation to becoming a company in the Union Army. And as Logan watched these men, he was within shouting distance of the Logan Hotel. At that time, his wife Mary was staying at the hotel, and his sister Annie was there also. And in a conversation between Annie and Mary, Logan's sister Annie Blanchard told Mary Logan, "I hope he gets killed before he's out of Jackson County. And Mary might have been a little fiery at that point in time because she decided she would just hit her sister-in-law, and did so. And a fight ensued, which was witnessed by a gentleman named Michael Schwarzkopf, who would be a part of the 31st. And it came to punching and pushing and hair pulling and rolling around on the ground. And it ended quite abruptly when Mary Logan picked up a chair and hit her sister-in-law over the head with the chair. That was the end of that particular argument.
There's no doubt Logan left for war heartsick and troubled, as Logan would soon discover a war of words and the occasional scuffle were nothing compared to what the future would bring. In fall 1861, among the Union troops which occupied Cairo were Logan's 31st Illinois and Lawler's 18th Illinois Infantries. The new commander of the Union forces in Cairo was Ulysses Grant.
No thing pleases Benny better than to shoulder his gun. He wouldn't give his place for a king's place. I would like to be up there and eat some of your apple butter and some chicken dumpling, but I guess it'll be a damned long time before I eat with you. Thomas M. Richards, Company K, 18th Illinois.
At the start of the war, the strategy was to prevent a Confederate invasion. But when Confederate forces occupied Columbus, Kentucky on the Mississippi, Union forces countered, taking Paducah and Smithland, where the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers meet the Ohio. On the morning of November 7th, Grant marched on Belmont, a small Missouri village opposite Columbus, Kentucky. The Union troops routed the Confederates, but reinforcements from Columbus arrived and pushed them back. After nearly getting cut off, the Union forces withdrew to their transports and returned to Cairo. Both sides claimed victory.
We had a hard fight yesterday. We fought 5 hours. The cannonballs were flying thick from Columbus. I felt cool and calm from the commencement. I had 4 holes shot through my coat, 1 through my pantaloons, and both my horses shot dead.
My dear wife, the battle is over. I did not pretend to shoot a gun, but to see how a battle was fought. Often I was where the bullets flew like hail, and the grape and canister shot tearing limbs from the trees, but was unhurt. As to who won, the victory or defeat I will leave for the papers to decide. Love to the children, and a kiss for yourself. Your husband, Lindorf Osborne.
Now you have hated Matt Turner, and so did all of us, but don't hate him any longer. He is the best soldier. He stood and shot just like he was a-killing squirrels. The boys say the devil can't scar him. According to Thomas, Matt bragged that by God, every time I fired my gun at a man, by God, he fell.
As the Illinois 31st fled the field that day, Logan had no way of knowing that his brother-in-law, Hybert Cunningham, stood among the opposing Confederate reinforcements. Grant lost over 100 killed and 1,000 wounded. No longer would war hold much glory for those who saw their friends killed and wounded that day. One of Belmont's wounded was 20-year-old Sergeant Felix Harmon from Randolph County. Harmon went home to recover but died a month later, survived by his wife of 2 years and a 17-month-old son. Of the total number of deaths among Egypt's volunteers in December, only Harmon's resulted from combat. On January 16, 1862, Private Alexander Richards wrote home from Cairo about his brother Benny.
This makes 21 days for Benny. He has not turned over for 5 days. He won't speak to me today. Look for him until he comes, for he can't get well.
Benny, who had survived Belmont, died 3 days later and was sent home to be buried. 49 men died of disease from mid-November to the end of January.
Mary Logan was constantly worried about her brother Hybert, whom she called Bub, and she was always asking John A. in letters, do you know where Bub is? Do you know where Bub is? And at one point, and this is after Belmont, and I think she had the idea that they had fought against each other at Belmont, she wrote General Grant and said, asking him basically, did you receive that letter my brother Hybert sent to ask permission to come back home. In Grant's reply, he says, "No, I did not receive a letter from your brother, but if he does want to come home, he's free to do so." The idea that Grant had was that if these people would come back, he would allow them to do so if they promised to put down arms and live as a peaceful citizen in the North. And I'm sure that relieved Mary, but Hybert was a little slow in asking for that permission.
As the winter of 1861 and 62 slipped into history, Union forces in Cairo once again prepared to move. The veterans of Belmont knew what was to come. Logan wrote Mary what he thought would be his last letter.
God only knows my fate. I want your prayers. Never before did I know how to love my own dear wife and child. I would give the world to see you once more. Should I fall, take care of our child, tell mother and family goodbye. I have no unkind feeling toward any one of them. I can write no more. My dear, I cover this with tears.
A week later, Logan was marching through the woods towards Fort Donelson. The day before, Union gunboats had leveled Fort Henry on the Tennessee River with little involvement from the infantry. Grant hoped the Union gunboats would also be successful at Donelson.
4 ironclad gunboats, 2 timberclads. They were fresh from victory at Fort Henry. They came around that bend toward where we're standing here now. And they're going to try the same tactic here that they tried at Henry, which was pull up as close as they could and blow the fort off the map. Those gunboats were hammered and battered, and they began to fall back. Grant is hoping to capture this fort without without the infantry attacking. But the gunboats were defeated. So, that part didn't work. Grant is still contemplating siege. He's contemplating what his next step will be. When the Confederates don't give him a chance to wait, the very next morning, the Confederates attack him.
By February 15th, Grant's army faced the Confederate lines. In some places, the two enemies could see each other and hear each other. Just before daybreak, the Confederates tried to escape along a road that can be seen today.
In this general area around us, a couple 300 acres here around us, is where the heaviest fighting occurred. There's going to be about 70% of the Union casualties that are going to occur on this ground.
As the Confederates pushed against the Union line, they fell back. Eventually, the Illinois 31st faced the enemy.
As the 31st leaves the battlefield, retreating, they leave in good order, and they actually hold their cartridge boxes up in the air so that everybody, I guess both sides, know that they're empty. They don't have anything else to shoot.
They're not running.
They're not running. We're out of ammunition.
Okay.
During the battle, Logan received multiple wounds, but kept fighting until the loss of blood forced him to quit. Logan was shot in the shoulder, thigh, and suffered multiple wounds when his sidearm was struck and exploded into his body. The people of Southern Illinois could not have known the full extent of the Battle of Fort Donelson as it was happening, but they must have realized a significant engagement was underway. According to one written account, people as far north as Benton, Illinois, could hear the cannon fire, a distance of more than 125 miles. All of Egypt anxiously awaited the news of Grant's campaign against Forts Henry and Donelson. As there was no policy to report deaths to families, Egypt's citizens scanned newspaper lists of the dead and awaited letters that would report their soldiers' survival. Thomas Richards wrote his sister Emmeline from Fort Donelson about the fate of family and friends.
4 days of hard fighting. William was wounded in the forehead slightly. A.B. Hayes in the face slightly. Thomas Morgan in the forehead slightly. John Brookman, poor fellow, he's dead. He was shot right through the head and killed dead. It's the worst looking sight ever I saw in my life, to walk over the battlefield and look at the dead and wounded. We've been laying in the snow for 4 days without any blankets or hardly anything to eat.
February 17th, 1862. The death of Colonel John A. Logan. While news of the victory at Fort Donelson will cause rejoicing everywhere, it will be received with glad though heavy hearts in southern Illinois, whose gallant idol has been sacrificed upon the altar of his country's need.
Mary was a widow with a 4-year-old daughter to care for. She decided to travel to the battlefield to retrieve her husband's body. Once she arrived at the battlefield, she found her husband alive. While Logan survived the battle, his good friend Lieutenant Colonel John White of Marion did not. His was one of 130 Egyptian deaths in the Battle of Fort Donelson. In early April, Grant moved his forces to a place called Pittsburgh Landing on the Tennessee River in pursuit of the Confederate forces he thought were somewhere in northern Mississippi. Much to Grant's surprise, the Confederates attacked on the morning of April 6th.
Well, they would have advanced from their camps to form for most of them in the first line here. Okay. And then this line is overwhelmed. They're pushed back. McClernand will try to rally them over here on the other side of this field, but they'll only hold for about 15 minutes before they're forced back.
Grant was so sure the Confederates were far enough away, he failed to order his men to dig in. With no fortifications or earthworks, the Federal forces had no choice but to look for any physical feature they could find for protection. The Illinois 9th Infantry found refuge in a ravine.
They are here firing from the other side of the ravine, which gives them some shelter. But at the same time, Jackson's Confederate brigade has broken through over here to the left. They have routed the 50th Illinois. Colonel Bain, who commands it, has been shot in the arm, and the unit begins to fall back. And they had been unaware of who was attacking them because they couldn't tell from the flags whether it was a Confederate Union unit, so they didn't know until they were right on top of them. So the 50th takes off, then the 12th, being outflanked, takes off. So by that time, Confederates are coming up the ravine. So if you're down here, you're being fired at from two sides. The 41st over on the right's pulling out because it's run out of ammunition, so you're about to be completely trapped.
On April 7th, Grant ordered a counterattack and drove the outnumbered Confederates back. By late afternoon on the 7th, the Confederates were in full retreat. The battle would be named for a log church located in the middle of the battlefield, Shiloh. The first year of the war cost Egypt 587 lives. Every county lost some of its citizens, from Edwards County 6 to Union County 67. Most of the deaths resulted from disease, but 211 men from Egypt fell in battle. Many, if not most of these men, lie buried near where they died. The men of the 9th Illinois Infantry were first buried in a trench near the ravine where they fell.
There would have been literally bodies all over this area, and the regiment, once they came here, would have gathered their own dead and tried to identify them. Now, some of the bodies were burned beyond recognition, but they did make an attempt to identify them and bury them here in a trench right after the battle, and this happened all over this battlefield.
Their bodies remained there for 4 years, but were moved to the newly created Shiloh National Cemetery in 1866. By then, any hope of identifying all but a few of them was impossible.
We had a list of the men who died there, and we had found that they did have marked graves in these cemeteries. And so you've read his Illinois regimental muster roll descriptions. You know, he might be 5'4", he might be 5'5", he might be 5'8", blue eyes, blonde hair, 18 years old and single, farmer, 36, married with 2 kids. You know all this stuff before you go down there about these men. And they died in these battles. And seeing that gravestone provides closure to their story, I think, because these guys who were buried in the unmarked graves, they just went away and didn't come back.
A few soldiers' bodies, however, were brought home. After Fort Donelson, the residents of Pinckneyville traveled to the battlefield to retrieve their dead. They brought home 21 and buried them in the Pinckneyville Cemetery in an area designated as the Soldiers' Burying Ground, now known as the Long Grave. To this day, the people of Pinckneyville observe Memorial Day at the site of these men's graves.